When your boss's cold sneer dismisses your warnings as sabotage, you know the fight for truth will cost you everything. "You're slowing down progress with unnecessary concerns," my boss said, sliding the termination notice across his desk. "We need people who prioritize deadlines." My name is Silas Navarro, 53 years old. I've spent 35 years on construction sites across Boise, Idaho. I started as a laborer and worked my way up to site supervisor at Stonecrest Builders. I know the rhythm of a job site, the sound of a properly running generator, the sight of a level foundation, the feel of correctly tensioned cables. More importantly, I know when something's wrong. For the past 6 months, I'd been overseeing the Skyline business tower, a 10-story office building that would be the tallest structure in the western part of the city. The project was already behind schedule when they brought in Mateo Alvarez, a 32-year-old project manager fresh from a high-profitable firm in Portland. His first day on site, he walked around with a tablet, tapping notes without once putting his hands on any materials or speaking to the crew beyond quick introductions. "These temporary supports don't match the specs," I'd told him last week, pointing to the inadequate bracing on the 4th floor. "We need to reinforce them before we continue upward." "The engineering team signed off on the current arrangement," he'd replied without looking up from his tablet, "moving forward as planned." I documented it like I did with everything: photos, notes, emails. Some might call it covering my ass. I called it doing my job. The day before my termination, Javier, my plumbing foreman, pulled me aside. "Mateo's out to get you, Silas," he whispered, his voice tense. I heard him tell Valeria, "You're obstructing the project. He's got fake reports saying you're causing delays." My gut twisted. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He looked away, ashamed. "He threatened my job. I'm telling you now, watch your back." I nodded, jaw tight. "Thanks, Javier. This isn't over." Now sitting in the site trailer, I watched Mateo wait for an explosion that wasn't coming. Men like him expected men like me to shout, to throw things, to make a scene when cornered. I simply nodded once and collected my hard hat. "I'll clear out my locker," I said. "I've already had your personal items packed," he replied, sliding a cardboard box toward me. "Security will walk you to your truck." Security, like I was some kind of threat? Like 35 years of showing up early and leaving late meant nothing? Like raising legitimate safety concerns made me dangerous. As I stood, Mateo leaned forward, his voice low. "You're making enemies, Navarro. Keep pushing and I'll make sure you never work in Boise again." I met his gaze. "You're cutting corners that'll kill people, Mateo." I'm not the one who should be scared. I took the box without checking its contents and followed the nervous young security guard to my truck. A few of the crew members noticed what was happening and stopped working. I gave them a small nod, not of goodbye, but of something else. Something that said, "Watch yourselves." As I pulled away from the site, I caught a glimpse of Mateo already talking to my replacement. The man he was speaking with was nodding enthusiastically, probably promising to keep things moving at all costs. It wouldn't be the last they'd see of me, though they didn't know it yet. I'd spent my working life building things that lasted. My father was a mason who taught me that shortcuts create weaknesses, and weaknesses eventually fail. "Do it right the first time," he'd say, "even if nobody but you knows the difference." This philosophy had earned me respect from crews and contractors alike. It had also cost me opportunities with companies that prized speed over quality. I'd been let go 3 times before for insisting on proper procedures. Each time I'd found another position within weeks. Good superintendents who actually care about code compliance aren't as common as you'd hope. My wife Carmen understood my principles even when they affected our finances. That night she saw my face and knew. "They fired you for doing the right thing, didn't they?" she said, her voice trembling with anger. "Mateo's a coward. Fight him, Silas. Don't let him win." I squeezed her hand. "I will, Carmen. This is bigger than me now. Your name is on that building as much as the developers," she'd tell me. "You have to sleep at night." Stonecrest had been different, at least at first. The company founder, Roland Vega, had built the company on a reputation for quality work. I joined 9 years ago when they were still mid-sized, handling mostly commercial renovations and small-scale developments. Then Roland retired. His daughter, Valeria, took over. The company quadrupled in size, and suddenly hitting deadlines became more important than doing things properly. The Skyline project was their largest yet, and the pressure from above was intense. 2 months ago, I challenged Matteo in a team meeting. "These bolts are substandard," I said, holding up the evidence. "We're risking collapse if we don't replace them." He smirked, dismissive. "You're paranoid, Silas. The supplier's fine, and we're on schedule." I stood my ground. "You're playing with lives, Matteo." "I won't sign off on this." His eyes flashed. "Keep this up and you're done here." The first sign of trouble came when they replaced our original project manager, Diego Morales, a seasoned professional I'd worked with for years, with Mateo Alvarez. "They're bringing in new blood." Diego had warned me during his last week. "These young guys from the big firms, they're all about the bottom line. Be careful, Silas." I'd nodded, not realizing how right he would be. During Mateo's first month, small corners were cut. Safety meetings shortened from 20 minutes to 7. Material inspections became cursory. Documentation requirements were relaxed. When I pushed back, I was labeled old-fashioned and resistant to change. I started keeping a separate log of all the deviations from code and best practices. Digital photos stored in the cloud, copies of emails sent from my personal account, voice recordings of conversations when Idaho law allowed it. The breaking point came when I discovered they'd substituted lower-grade structural bolts than what the plans called for on the 5th and 6th floors. The difference wouldn't be visible to an inspector without close examination, but in an earthquake or severe wind event, it could mean catastrophic failure. "We need to replace these," I'd told Matteo, showing him the comparison. He'd glanced at the bolts in my palm and said, "The supplier assured me they're within acceptable parameters. We're not delaying the steel team for this." That was 3 days before my termination. I drove straight home after being escorted off the site, the cardboard box riding shotgun like a silent passenger. Carmen wouldn't be back from her shift at the clinic for hours. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a long while, staring at the house we'd bought 18 years ago. It needed new siding. I'd been planning to do it myself this fall. Now I had the time, but potentially not the money. Inside, I set the box on the kitchen table and finally looked through its contents. My thermos, a few reference books, the framed photo of Carmen and me at Yellowstone National Park. My personal tools were missing. A high-end DeWalt drill set, precision measuring equipment, specialized gear I'd accumulated over decades, about $3,500, 0 cents worth. I made a list of everything missing, then called the Human Resources Department at Stonecrest's main office. The woman who answered sounded uncomfortable when I explained the situation. She hesitated, then whispered, "Mateo's saying you stole company property, Silas. He's trying to frame you. Be careful." I clenched my fist. "He's the thief. I want my tools back, and I want his lies in writing." "I'll look into it, Mr. Navarro," she said. "But I should inform you that according to Mr. Alvarez's report, you were terminated for insubordination and creating a hostile work environment." I hadn't raised my voice once in all my interactions with Mateo, not even today. "That's interesting," I replied evenly. "I'd like that in writing, please." "Excuse me?" "The reasons for my termination. I'd like them in writing, and I'd like my tools returned. Otherwise, we can discuss this through my attorney." She promised to call back. I hung up and stared at my phone for a long moment before opening my personal email. There, in organized folders, was everything I'd documented over the past 6 months. 92 distinct safety violations, ranging from minor to potentially catastrophic, all with photographic evidence, all with records of my attempts to address them through proper channels. It wasn't just about getting fired anymore. It was about the 250 people who would eventually work in that building. It was about the construction crew who didn't know what was being hidden behind drywall and underneath flooring. It was about every corner cut becoming a potentially lethal hazard down the line. I started a new email addressed to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's regional office. The subject line was simple: urgent, multiple critical safety violations at Skyline Business Tower. I worked methodically, organizing the violations by category and severity, cross-referencing code requirements, attaching documentation. 5 hours passed. Carmen came home and found me still at the computer. "Silas, what happened?" I told her everything while continuing to type. She stood behind me, her hands resting on my shoulders, reading the screen as I worked. "They're going to fight back," she said quietly. "Let them. You might not get another job in this town." I paused, hands hovering over the keyboard. Carmen's voice hardened. "They're corrupt, Silas. Mateo, Valeria, they're risking lives. For profit. Make them pay. Some things matter more than a paycheck." She squeezed my shoulders gently. "I know. That's why I married you." I hit send at 10:32 p.m. Then I started another email to the state building inspector's office. The call from Mateo came at 8 o'clock the next morning. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Silas?" His voice was tight, controlled anger. "Good morning, Mateo. I just got a call from OSHA saying they've received a complaint about our site. Was that you?" I sat at the kitchen table, coffee mug in hand. Mateo's tone turned menacing. "You're a dead man in this industry, Navarro. Drop this, or I'll make sure every contractor knows you're a troublemaker." I stayed calm. "You're the one breaking the law, Mateo. The truth's coming for you. I documented legitimate safety concerns, that's all. You were fired for causing problems, and now you're proving me right." His voice dropped to something almost like reason. "Look, Silas, I understand you're upset, but this vindictive behavior isn't going to help you find another position. In fact, I'm already getting calls from other firms asking about you." The threat was clear. Keep pushing and I'd be blackballed. "If the site is up to code, you have nothing to worry about," I replied. He laughed, short and sharp. "We both know inspections can be subjective. One person's violation is another's acceptable variance. But what's not subjective is how the industry views disgruntled employees who try to sabotage projects after being terminated." "Is that what happened to my tools?" I asked. "Sabotage?" A pause. "What tools?" "The ones not returned with my personal effects." "I've already filed a police report for theft." That wasn't true yet, but his reaction told me everything. "You know what? Keep the tools. Consider it severance. But drop this OSHA nonsense before you hurt yourself." "Goodbye, Mateo." I hung up and immediately called the police department to file that report. They took the information but didn't sound optimistic about recovery. Next, I called 4 construction companies I had relationships with to inquire about openings. 3 didn't return my calls. The 4th, Ironwood Construction, had the owner's daughter call me back. She sounded nervous. "Mateo's been calling around, Silas. He's saying you sabotaged the Skyline project. Dad wants to help, but we can't risk the backlash." I clenched my jaw. He's lying. "Tell your dad the truth will come out soon." "I'd like to help you out, Silas," she said, "but we've got a full roster right now and, well, there's been some talk." "What kind of talk?" "That you're difficult to work with, that you make trouble." She sounded genuinely uncomfortable. "Look, I know my dad respects you, but the industry is tight right now. Maybe try again in a few months when this all blows over." By mid-afternoon, I'd received similar responses from 2 more companies. Word travels fast in construction circles, especially in a city the size of Boise. At 5:00 p.m., my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was an attorney representing Stonecrest Builders. "Mr. Navarro? I'm calling to inform you that any further communication from you regarding the Skyline project could be considered defamatory and result in legal action." "Are you saying the company would sue me for reporting legitimate safety violations to regulatory authorities?" The attorney's voice was icy. "Mateo's prepared to testify. You fabricated those violations, Navarro. Back off, or we'll ruin you." I laughed coldly. "Tell Mateo to save his lies for court. I've got proof." "I'm saying that your characterization of standard industry practices as violations appears to be retaliatory in nature, given the timing. Furthermore, you removed confidential project documentation when you left the company, which constitutes theft of intellectual property." I hadn't removed anything. All my documentation had been created on my personal devices and stored in my personal accounts, but they were laying groundwork to discredit me. "Send me a formal cease and desist if that's your position," I replied. Otherwise, I have nothing more to say." 4 days later, I received a thick envelope from their law firm. Inside was a cease and desist letter threatening legal action if I continued to malign the company, along with a non-disclosure agreement they claimed I had signed upon hiring. I hadn't signed any such document, but fighting this would require an attorney I couldn't currently afford. They were trying to bury me before the inspectors even arrived at the site. 9 days after my termination, I was sitting in a diner downtown when Javier Torres slid into the booth across from me. Javier had been my plumbing foreman on the Skyline project, and we'd worked together on and off for 18 years. "This is probably a bad idea," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Probably." I pushed my coffee cup aside. "How are things at the site?" Javier's voice trembled. "Mateo's threatening everyone, Silas. Says he'll fire anyone who talks about you. But I've got something big." Chaos. Mateo's got everyone working overtime to fix the issues before the OSHA inspection. They've scheduled it for next Wednesday. I nodded. "They're replacing the bolts and reinforcing the supports you flagged. But here's the thing, Silas." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "It goes deeper than what you saw. They've been falsifying materials documentation for months. Remember those concrete samples that failed the strength test back in March?" I remembered. The first pour for the foundation had shown concerning results, but Mateo had assured everyone that subsequent tests came back fine. "They never retested," Javier continued. "They just changed the paperwork. Same with the fire rating on some of the materials. The manufacturer sent a notice about a batch being below spec, but it was buried." My stomach tightened. "How do you know this?" "Clara in purchasing. She's been keeping her own records because she was worried about liability. When she heard you got fired, she came to me." He slid a flash drive across the table. Copies of the original documentation versus what was submitted to the inspectors. I stared at the small black device, not reaching for it immediately. "Why are you doing this, Javier? You've got a pension coming in a few years." Javier's eyes burned. "Mateo's a liar, Silas. He's risking my daughter's life in that building. I'm with you. Let's take them down. My daughter's firm is going to lease 2 floors in that building when it's done." He met my eyes steadily. "And I was raised to do what's right, same as you." I picked up the flash drive. "They'll figure out where this came from." "Probably, but I'm old enough not to care much anymore." After Javier left, I walked to the public library and used their computer to review the files. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The documentation showed systematic fraud, not just shortcuts and oversights, but deliberate falsification of safety testing and material quality. This wasn't just about Mateo Alvarez. This went up to corporate level, involving purchasing directors and project executives. The Skyline project had been bid too low to win the contract, and now they were making up the difference by using substandard materials. I called Javier that night. "This is explosive, Javier. They'll come for us both." He didn't flinch. "Let them try. My daughter deserves a safe building and you deserve justice." On my way home, I drove past the construction site. The building had reached 7 stories now. I thought about all the people who would work there, unaware of what was hidden in the walls and floors beneath them. When I got home, Carmen was waiting with news of her own. "I ran into Marisol Rivera at the clinic today." Marisol was married to a city council member. She mentioned that Stonecrest made some hefty campaign contributions to the mayor and several council members last year, right before they got fast-tracked approval for the Skyline zoning variance. Carmen's voice was fierce. "It's a conspiracy, Silas. Mateo and Valeria are in bed with the city. Expose them before they silence you." The pieces were falling into place. Political connections, rushed approvals, cut corners, falsified documentation. This wasn't just negligence, it was corruption. I called my contact at OSHA that evening and left a voicemail explaining that I had additional documentation that needed to be reviewed before the inspection. Then I forwarded everything from Javier to both OSHA and the state building inspector's office. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from Roland Vega, the retired founder of Stonecrest Builders. "We need to talk, Silas," he said, his voice grave. "This goes deeper than you know." I met Roland at his lakeside home 40 miles outside the city. At 74, he still had the weathered hands and straight posture of a man who'd spent decades on construction sites before moving into management. "I never should have let my daughter take over," he said as we sat on his deck. "Valeria always cared more about growth than quality, but I never thought she'd go this far." "You know about the falsified documentation?" Roland nodded. Roland's voice broke. "Valeria's betrayed everything I built, Silas. She's bribing inspectors, risking lives. Help me stop her before it's too late." "I've been hearing things from old contacts. When your OSHA complaint hit, several people called me." He took a sip of his coffee. "What you don't know is that Skyline isn't just another project for Stonecrest. It's the cornerstone of their bid for the new university campus expansion. That's a $150 million 0-cents contract. I understood now why they'd reacted so strongly to my complaint. If OSHA found serious violations at Skyline, they'd lose any chance at the university project. I've been collecting information too," Roland continued. "Valeria doesn't know I still have access to certain company accounts. I've documented irregular payments to city inspectors, the altered test results, everything." He fixed me with a steady gaze. "I built that company on my reputation. I won't let them destroy it or build death traps with my name attached." We spent 3 hours planning our next steps. Roland would approach the board of directors with his evidence, forcing internal action. Meanwhile, I would work with OSHA to ensure the inspection was thorough and couldn't be circumvented. The next day, I received a call from a journalist at the Idaho Statesman. Somehow she'd heard about the OSHA complaint. She was blunt. "Mateo's team is smearing you, Silas. They're saying you're a disgruntled liar. Give me something to fight back with." "I'm working on a story about construction safety oversight," she explained. "Your name came up as someone with concerns about the Skyline project." I was careful with my words. "I can confirm that I reported safety issues through proper channels. Beyond that, I can't comment on an ongoing investigation." "We've heard rumors about falsified safety documentation. Can you confirm that?" "Someone was leaking information, probably from the city offices. I would encourage you to request public records related to the project's approvals and inspections. That's all I can say for now." The article ran 4 days later, not naming me directly, but mentioning serious allegations from a former site supervisor regarding structural integrity and documentation practices. By that afternoon, the mayor's office had issued a statement expressing full confidence in the city's building inspection process and promising transparent cooperation with regulatory authorities. The next morning, I got a text from Javier. "OSHA here now. Not scheduled inspection. Multiple inspectors." I smiled. The article had accelerated things. 2 hours later, Roland called. "The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. I'm presenting everything." "How's Valeria taking it?" Roland's voice was heavy. "She's furious, Silas. She knows I'm coming for her. She threatened to disown me if I don't stop." "She doesn't know yet. She's at the site dealing with the OSHA situation. Everything was coming together faster than we'd anticipated." That evening, a courier delivered an envelope to my house. Inside was a formal offer of employment from Timberline Contracting, a respected firm based in Coeur d'Alene with a satellite office in Boise. The owner was an old friend of Roland's, though the letter didn't mention that connection. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Javier. "Mateo terminated effective immediately. Corporate team on site taking over project management." Justice was swift once the dominoes started falling, but I knew Stonecrest would try to contain the damage by sacrificing Mateo while protecting the company's larger interests. They'd claim he acted alone, that corporate had no knowledge of his methods. That's why Roland and I had agreed on one final step. Tomorrow he would provide all his documentation to the state attorney general's office, along with a formal request for a criminal investigation into corporate fraud. I texted Javier back. "Mateo's just the start. Valeria's next. Stay strong. We're winning." The truth was going to come out. All of it. No matter who it hurt. 4 weeks after my termination, I stood in the back of the county courthouse meeting room as the Idaho Department of Labor and Industry announced their findings. Press filled half the seats, with Stonecrest executives and city officials occupying the front row. Valeria Vega sat stiffly beside the company attorney, her face a mask of professional concern. She'd spent the past 2 weeks positioning herself as the solution rather than the problem, publicly thanking the whistleblowers for bringing isolated incidents of non-compliance to light and promising full cooperation with authorities. The commissioner's voice cut through the murmurs. Following exhaustive investigation, we have identified systematic and deliberate falsification of safety documentation at the Skyline business tower. The violations are so severe that we are issuing an immediate stop work order on the project. Camera flashes popped as she continued. Additionally, we are recommending criminal charges against 4 Stonecrest Builders executives for knowingly endangering public safety and worker welfare through fraudulent practices. One of those executives was Valeria Vega. I watched as she leaned over to whisper urgently to her attorney. The lawyer shook his head slightly. There would be no easy escape this time. Roland stood at my side, his expression solemn but resolved. He gripped my arm, his voice low. We did it, Silas. Valeria's finished, but it cost me my daughter. Thank you for standing with me. He'd sacrificed his relationship with his daughter to do what was right. Neither of us took pleasure in Stonecrest's public downfall, but we both understood the necessity. The commissioner finished by thanking the whistleblowers whose documentation had been instrumental in preventing what could have been a future tragedy. She didn't name us, but Valeria turned in her seat, scanning the room until her eyes found mine. Her gaze was pure venom, but I held it, unyielding. You'll pay for this, Navarro, she mouthed silently. I shook my head, calm. You already have. I held her gaze steadily, neither angry nor triumphant, just a man who had done his job, even when it cost him everything. Some principles aren't negotiable. 7 months after the Skyline scandal broke, I stood on the foundation of what would become the new Boise Community Medical Center Annex. My hard hat had the Timberline Contracting logo now, and my title was Senior Project Manager. The concrete beneath my boots had been poured according to exact specifications with proper testing and documentation. Every step of the process had been methodical, verified, and done right the first time. The Skyline building had been taken down to its foundation and was being rebuilt by a coalition of local construction firms under intense regulatory scrutiny. Stonecrest Builders no longer existed. The company had dissolved after criminal indictments and civil lawsuits made it impossible to continue operations. Valeria Vega had taken a plea deal in exchange for testimony against other executives and the city officials who had looked the other way. Roland had sold his retirement home to help establish a fund for construction workers who had lost jobs in the aftermath. Not everyone had supported my actions. Some in the industry still viewed me as the man who brought down a major company and cost people their livelihoods. Others quietly thanked me for standing up for standards that protected everyone. Javier Torres was my plumbing superintendent now. Clara from purchasing had joined Timberline too. We'd brought over several good people who shared our commitment to doing things properly. Carmen and I had finished putting the new siding on our house ourselves, working evenings and weekends. Carmen hugged me that night, her voice proud. You didn't just save lives, Silas. You showed them integrity wins. I've never been prouder. The physical labor had been therapeutic after months of legal meetings and depositions. Ready for the inspection? My assistant asked, approaching with clipboard in hand. Javier overheard and clapped my shoulder. They're terrified of you now, Silas. No one's cutting corners with you around. Always, I replied. I'd learned that doing the right thing rarely came without cost, but I'd also discovered that I could sleep at night, look my wife in the eye, and face myself in the mirror each morning. Some victories are measured not in what you gain, but in what you refuse to lose.